Had a plan. I'd had it for almost 2 years, and on the night my daughter called to invite me to Thanksgiving dinner, I almost smiled. Almost. I let the phone ring 4 times before I picked up, not because I was hesitant, because I wanted to be sure my voice was steady. "Dad," she said, "we'd love to have you this year. It's been too long." Too long. That was one way to put it. 16 years is too long. 16 Thanksgivings, 16 Christmases, 16 birthdays that passed like any other Tuesday. 16 years of sending cards that were never acknowledged, leaving voicemails that were never returned, and sitting in my small apartment in Tucson wondering what I'd done so wrong that my own child had erased me. But I said I'd like that Vanessa, and I meant it, just not the way she thought I did. I should back up. My name is Eugene. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a mechanical engineer at a mid-size aerospace firm in Phoenix, and for most of those years I believed the things you're supposed to believe, that hard work pays off, that family is everything, that if you love your children unconditionally, that love comes back to you somehow. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. I was wrong about that last part. My wife Lorraine left me when Vanessa was 14. I don't say that to make Lorraine a villain. Marriages end, people grow apart. What I will say is that the way it happened left a mark I carried for a long time. She'd been seeing someone, a man named Patrick, who worked in commercial real estate and drove a new Mercedes, and had never, as far as I could tell, ever worried about a mortgage payment in his life. She chose him. I understood that. What I didn't understand, not for a long time, was why she took Vanessa with her so completely. Within a year of the divorce, Vanessa had stopped calling me Dad in front of Patrick's kids. She started referring to me as Eugene in text messages when she bothered to send them. By the time she was 17, the visits had dwindled to nothing. I'd show up for her high school graduation with a card and a check, and she'd give me a hug that lasted maybe 2 seconds and spend the rest of the afternoon with Patrick's arm around her shoulder like he'd raised her himself. I told myself it was a phase. Teenagers do this, she'd come back around. She didn't. She went to Arizona State, then got a master's degree in marketing out in Charlotte, then married a man named Bryce who had sharp eyes and a way of talking that made everything sound like a business proposition. I found out about the wedding through a mutual cousin 3 weeks after it happened. No invitation, no call, just a photo someone tagged on Facebook of Vanessa in a white dress, laughing, surrounded by people I'd never met. I remember sitting in my kitchen looking at that photo for a long time. Then I closed the laptop and went to bed. That was 7 years before she called me about Thanksgiving. In between, there was my heart surgery. A double bypass, age 58, Methodist Hospital in Phoenix. I was in that building for 6 days. My sister flew in from Ohio to sit with me. A colleague from work stopped by twice. My daughter, who lived 11 hours away by car, did not come, did not call the hospital, sent a text message 4 days after I was home that said, "Hope you're feeling better, been super busy." I stared at that message for probably 10 minutes. Then I put my phone face down on the nightstand and I made a decision. I decided I was done waiting. I want to be careful here because what came next could sound calculated and cold if I describe it wrong. It wasn't cold, it was the opposite. It was the first genuinely warm thing I'd done for myself in years. After I recovered, I started making changes. Quietly, not dramatically. I've never been a dramatic person. I kept showing up to work. I kept living in the same apartment. I drove the same Ford F-150 I'd had since 2011, but I started being very deliberate about money. I'd always been good with finances. Lorraine used to joke that I read investment newsletters the way other men read sports pages. After the divorce, I'd mostly just been cautious, kept a decent savings account, maxed my 401k, didn't overspend. But after my surgery, I got intentional. I started working with a financial advisor named Miles who specialized in real estate investment. I used a portion of my savings to buy a duplex in Mesa, then another small rental property in Tempe. I refinanced smartly, kept my personal expenses low, and let the income compound. By the time I turned 62 and took early retirement, I had 6 rental properties generating reliable monthly income, a retirement account that made my advisor visibly pleased, and enough liquidity that I didn't need to think twice about anything that cost less than 5 figures. Nobody knew. That was the part I found quietly satisfying. I still drove the F-150. I still wore the same kind of khaki pants and flannel shirts I'd always worn. I still ate at the same diner on Sunday mornings and left the same tip for the same waitress who'd been there since before my surgery. From the outside, I was just a retired engineer living modestly in Tucson. Which was true. I just happened to be a retired engineer with a very healthy net worth and a lawyer named Gloria who had drafted a very specific estate plan. I hadn't told Vanessa any of this. I hadn't told anyone except Miles and Gloria, and my friend Darnell, who'd been my closest friend since we worked together in the late 90s, and who was the only person I truly trusted with anything important anymore. Darnell was the one who told me to be careful. "You know it's going to happen," he said one evening when we were sitting on my back porch, watching the sun go down over the Rincons. "Somewhere, somehow, she's going to find out, and then you're going to get a phone call." "I know," I said. "And what are you going to do?" I took a sip of my iced tea. "I'm going to answer it." He looked at me for a long moment. "Eugene," he said, "don't let this make you into somebody you're not." That stayed with me. I thought about it a lot over the next several months, and then the phone rang. It turned out a cousin. My cousin, a well-meaning woman named Beverly, who'd kept in casual contact with both me and Lorraine over the years, had mentioned in passing at some family gathering that I'd retired and was doing really well. She didn't give details. She didn't need to. In my family, retired early and doing really well translates pretty cleanly. The call came on a Tuesday night in October. "Dad," first time she'd used that word in years. I noticed it. "It's Vanessa." "I know," I said. "How are you?" There was a small pause, the kind that tells you someone was expecting a warmer reception. "I'm good. We're good. Bryce and I are actually in a really good place." Another pause. "I've been thinking a lot lately about family, about how fast time goes. I feel like we've let things drift too much." "We," as if drifting had been mutual. I said, "It has been a while." "I want to fix that, Dad. I really do. Thanksgiving is coming up, and I thought, we'd love to have you. Bryce's family has a place up in Asheville, and it's beautiful this time of year. I think it could be really healing for us." Healing. There was a word. "That sounds nice," I said. "I'd like to see you." I heard the relief in her exhale. "Really?" "Oh, that's great. I'll send you the details." "You do that," I said. I sat in my kitchen after I hung up, and I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something more complicated than that, a kind of tired sadness underneath a very clear resolve. She was my daughter. She would always be my daughter. But I was no longer the man who would set aside 16 years of silence because she'd decided it was convenient to remember me. I called Darnell. "She called," I said. "I know," he said. "Beverly told me she was going to. I didn't say anything because I wanted to see what you'd do." "What did you think I'd do?" "I thought you might hang up." "I thought about it," I admitted. "But you didn't." "No, I'm going to Asheville." There was a pause. "You sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything," I said. "Asheville in late November is beautiful. I'll give them that. The mountain air had that sharp, clean smell, and the house, Bryce's parents' house, technically a second home they used twice a year, was a 4-bedroom timber frame thing with a wraparound porch and a view that would have made a painter weep. I arrived the day before Thanksgiving, and Vanessa met me at the door with a hug that lasted longer than 2 seconds for the first time, and I couldn't remember how long. She looked like her mother. She always had. Same dark hair, same way of holding her chin up when she was uncertain about something. Bryce shook my hand. Firm grip, direct eye contact, the practiced warmth of a man who'd been in sales long enough to make it look natural. "Eugene," he said, "great to finally meet you properly." Finally, as if the delay had been geography. His parents, Leonard and Connie, were gracious in the way that people who've had money long enough to be comfortable with it tend to be gracious, easy, undemonstrative, quietly observant. Leonard was a retired attorney. Connie ran a non-profit. They were perfectly fine people, and I found myself, over that first evening, genuinely enjoying their company more than I'd expected to. Dinner was good. The wine was good. And then, after the dishes were cleared and Leonard and Connie had gone to bed, Bryce leaned back in his chair and said, in a voice calibrated to sound casual, "So, Eugene, Beverly mentioned you've done pretty well for yourself since retirement." There it was. "I've been comfortable," I said. "Real estate," she said. "Some." Vanessa reached over and put her hand on mine. "Dad, we're not trying to pry. It's just, we've been doing some thinking lately about the future, about family." "About a business opportunity," Bryce said, and to his credit, at least he said it plainly. "I've got a partner who's put together a really strong commercial development deal in South Carolina, mixed use, walking distance from a new transit hub. The numbers are genuinely good, and we're looking for a few silent investors to round out the funding." I looked at him, then I looked at my daughter. "How much are you looking at?" I asked. 250,000 would get you in at the second tier," he said. "Returns projected at." "Let me think about it," I said. Vanessa squeezed my hand. "We're not pressuring you, Dad. We just thought—" "I know what you thought," I said quietly, and then I smiled. "Let me sleep on it." I didn't sleep much. Not because I was anguished or conflicted. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I lay in the guest bedroom with the window cracked and the cold mountain air coming in, and I thought about the shape of 16 years. I thought about the text message I'd gotten from a hospital bed. I thought about a wedding photo on Facebook. I thought about a girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long car trips and call me daddy and ask me to read to her. And I thought about the woman downstairs who would let all of that go so thoroughly and so completely that she only found her way back to me when someone mentioned I had money. I didn't feel angry anymore. That was the thing that surprised me lying there in the dark. I just felt clear. In the morning I called Gloria. She confirmed that everything we prepared was in order. Then I called Darnell. "How is it?" he said. "Nice house," I said. "They want 250 to invest in a development deal." A silence. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said. "I'm going to need you to do something for me." Thanksgiving dinner was the kind of meal that takes all day to prepare and looks effortless on the table. Connie was a remarkable cook. There were 14 people around that table. Bryce's siblings and their families, a few friends of his parents, Vanessa and Bryce, and me, the only guest who'd driven down from Tucson alone. I helped Connie in the kitchen for part of the morning. We talked about her non-profit work, literacy programs for adults in Western North Carolina. She was sharp and funny, and I found myself thinking that under different circumstances I might have genuinely liked being part of this extended family. After the meal, when the plates were cleared and people had settled into that comfortable post-dinner quiet, Bryce refilled everyone's wine and looked at me from across the table. "So," he said, with that practiced ease, "have you had a chance to think about what we discussed?" The room wasn't fully quiet, but it was quiet enough. "I have," I said. Vanessa looked at me with an expression I'd seen on her face before, a very long time ago, the hopeful look she'd had as a little girl when she was waiting to hear good news. It hit me somewhere I didn't expect. "I want to ask you something first," I said. "I was looking at my daughter. Do you remember the spring I turned 58? She blinked. "Dad, I had a surgery, a double bypass. I was at Methodist Hospital in Phoenix for 6 days. I kept my voice even, not accusing, just stating. Do you remember that?" The table had gone very quiet. Vanessa's chin came up, the way her mother's always did. "Dad, that was years ago." "I know when it was," I said gently. "I'm not angry about it. I want you to understand that. I'm truly not angry. I've had a long time to make my peace with a lot of things. But I do think, before we talk about business, we should be honest with each other." Bryce said, "Eugene, I'm not sure this is the time." "I got a text," I continued, still looking at Vanessa, 4 days after I came home from the hospital. It said, 'Hope you're feeling better. Been super busy.' That was the last communication I had from you for 14 months. I paused. "I want you to know that I kept it. I'm not sure why. Maybe because it was all I had." Vanessa's eyes were wet. I hadn't expected that, and it softened something in me, even as I kept going. "I'm going to decline the investment," I said, and I watched Bryce's expression recalibrate. "Not because I don't believe the numbers are good. I genuinely have no idea if they're good or not. I'm declining because I don't believe it's the reason I was invited here, and because I think we'd all be better served being honest about that." Leonard, at the far end of the table, was watching me with the quiet attention of a man who'd spent decades in courtrooms. "But I didn't come here just to say no," I continued. "I came because I wanted to see you, Vanessa. I wanted to sit across a table from you and know you were all right. And I wanted to tell you something I should have told you a long time ago." She was crying quietly now. Bryce had gone still. "Your mother and I failed you in ways I'm still accounting for. When we divorced, you were caught in the middle and we let you stay there too long. I told myself you'd come back around when you were ready. I was passive when I should have been persistent. I'm sorry for that. I meant every word of it. And I also need to tell you that I love you. I have loved you since before you were born, and I will love you until I'm in the ground. But I can't be your father on terms that only work when it's convenient. That's not a relationship. That's a transaction." I pushed back from the table, folded my napkin, set it down. "I'm going to drive back to Tucson tomorrow morning. I'm going to leave you my new phone number. I got a new one last year, which I suspect you might not have, and I want you to call me, not about money, just to talk." I looked at her directly. "Can you do that?" She nodded. She was too full to speak. I looked at Bryce. "I wish you luck with the development. I mean that sincerely." He nodded too. He had the grace, at least, to look slightly ashamed. I excused myself and went out to the porch. Darnell called me while I was standing there in the cold, looking out at the dark mountains. "How'd it go?" he said. I thought about it. I said what I needed to say. Did she hear it? "I think so. I don't know if it matters yet." "It might matter later," he said. "It might," I agreed. "I'll take later." I stayed on the porch for a while after I hung up. The air was sharp and clear and the kind of cold that feels cleansing rather than uncomfortable if you're dressed for it. About 20 minutes later, the screen door opened and Vanessa came out. She'd brought 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to me without speaking and stood beside me, shoulder to shoulder, looking out at the same dark trees. We stood that way for a long time. Finally, she said, "I missed you, Dad. I don't have a good reason why I didn't call. I wish I did." "I know," I said. "I'm ashamed." "I know that too." She wrapped her hands around a mug. "Bryce isn't a bad person. He thinks about things a certain way." "So do we all," I said. "I'm not going to make excuses. I'm not asking you to." Another long silence. An owl somewhere in the trees below the porch. The mountains just barely visible as dark shapes against a dark sky. "Will you actually give me your number?" she said finally. "The new one." I took out my phone and read it to her. She typed it in. Then she held her phone out and said, "This is mine." I typed it in too. "Call me," I said. "Whenever you want. I'll answer." She nodded. Then she went back inside, and I stood there a little while longer with my coffee going cold in my hands, thinking about 16 years and what they cost both of us, and what, if anything, might be worth salvaging from what was left. I drove back to Tucson the next morning, early, before the house was fully awake. I left a note for Leonard and Connie, thanking them for their hospitality. I meant that too. The drive from Asheville back is long through multiple states, and I didn't hurry it. I stopped in Knoxville for lunch at a diner that reminded me of the one back home. I stopped again outside of Nashville to stretch my legs and watch the sun go down over a rest area in a way that had no business being as beautiful as it was. I thought about what Darnell had said months ago on my back porch. "Don't let this make you into somebody you're not." I hadn't. I was sure of that now. I also thought about what comes next, and I'll tell you honestly, I don't know. Vanessa might call. She might not. She might call once and let it drift again. She might mean it this time. People are complicated, and damage done over 16 years doesn't get repaired in a single conversation on a cold porch in North Carolina, no matter how honest that conversation is. But I'd said what was true. I'd declined what wasn't right. I'd left a door open without hinging my peace on whether she walked through it. That was all I could do. That was enough. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, on a Sunday afternoon, my phone buzzed. I was at the diner, drinking coffee, reading the paper, same as always. The text said, "Hi Dad, just thinking about you. How are you?" I set down my coffee. I looked at it for a moment. Then I wrote back, "Doing well. Call me when you have time. I'd like to hear your voice." I put the phone in my pocket and looked out the window at the parking lot in the dry Tucson afternoon, and I felt not healed exactly, not fixed, but lighter than I had in a very long time. The waitress came by with the coffee pot. I covered my mug and shook my head. "Actually," I said, "I think I'm ready to go." I left the tip on the table, the same one I always left, and I walked out into the afternoon, and I kept going. There's a moment, somewhere in the middle of that Thanksgiving dinner, when I looked across the table at my daughter and understood something I'd been circling for years. The people who hurt us most aren't always strangers. They're the ones we handed pieces of ourselves to, freely, and who set those pieces down without looking back. And the damage they leave isn't only the absence, it's the waiting. The years spent wondering if you did something wrong, if you could have loved differently, if the door might open if you just stayed quiet and patient long enough. I waited 16 years. That's a long time to be patient, and I'll tell you honestly, patience alone didn't save me. What saved me was deciding, at some point after I got home from a hospital where no one who shared my blood came to sit with me, that I was going to live the rest of my life on terms that made sense, not out of bitterness, not to punish anyone, just because I finally understood that my life was the only one I had, and I wasn't going to spend the back half of it arranged around someone else's convenience. That decision required something I didn't have a clean word for at the time. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't surrender. It was closer to integrity, the kind that's quiet and unglamorous and mostly invisible to everyone around you. I kept showing up to work. I kept making careful choices. I kept my expenses modest and my investments patient, not because I was building toward revenge, but because those were simply the right things to do. Doing the right thing, consistently, even when no one was watching. I think that's what people mean when they talk about character. It's not dramatic. It's just what you do on a Tuesday when there's no audience. And then there's the matter of knowing what you're actually looking at when life hands you a situation. When Vanessa called, I could have told myself a story that felt good, that she'd grown, that she was reaching out from genuine remorse, that things were different now. Part of me wanted to believe that. But I'd spent enough years making decisions based on what I hoped was true, rather than what I could actually see. I looked at the timing, I listened to how she said things, I paid attention to what Bryce asked about over dinner. Understanding a situation clearly, without flinching from what it shows you, that's its own kind of discipline. It doesn't make you cynical, it makes you honest. What I said at that table cost me something. I don't mean the investment, I mean the version of the evening that could have gone smoothly if I'd just smiled and let it go. I could have written the check, I could have pretended the 16 years hadn't happened. I could have bought myself a relationship with my daughter that was built on money instead of truth. But I knew, sitting there, that a relationship built on that foundation would eventually collapse the same way the first one had. I chose honesty over comfort. That was hard. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't. What I didn't expect was that it might actually work. Not instantly, not completely, but Vanessa stood next to me on that porch and didn't make excuses and didn't deflect. She just said she was ashamed. That was real. I could feel the difference. 3 weeks later, she texted. I texted back. We'll see what comes next. I don't know how the rest of this goes. What I know is that I walked out of that house in Asheville feeling like myself, the version of myself I'd been quietly working to become for years. That's the only outcome I was actually in control of. And it turned out to be enough.